The first time Ji-sung Kim saw her, she was curled up on the hard plastic bench of a downtown Baltimore bus stop, her knees pulled to her chest, her thin jacket doing nothing against the December wind. He'd been walking back from a meeting that had ended with blood on his knuckles and a rival's promise of retaliation, his mind already calculating the next move in a game where mercy was weakness and attachment was death. But something about the way she breathed, slow, deliberate, like she was rationing even her oxygen, made him stop. The streetlight above flickered, casting broken gold across her face. She looked young, maybe 24, but exhaustion had carved lines around her eyes that spoke of struggles he recognized from his own reflection years ago. She wasn't just homeless. She was fighting. Still fighting. In his world, Ji-sung had rejected every woman thrown at him. Models, heiresses, political daughters. Women offered like chess pieces to secure alliances and strengthen empires. They all wanted something. His power, his protection, his name. But this girl sleeping on a frozen bench with nothing but stubborn survival keeping her breathing wanted nothing from him, because she didn't even know he existed. 3 months later, as he stood in that same spot watching rival clan members circle the block, Ji-sung realized that the woman who'd asked for nothing had become the only thing he couldn't live without. And tonight, they were coming for both of them. Welcome to Korean Mafia lovers. Tell us in the comments which city you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us create these incredible love stories that'll have you believing in fate. Ji-sung Kim had built his reputation on 3 principles: never show weakness, never trust completely, and never let emotion cloud judgment. At 28, he controlled the most sophisticated Korean syndicate on the East Coast, a network of legitimate businesses, strategic alliances, and carefully managed territories that stretched from Baltimore to Boston. Politicians knew his name. Rivals feared it. Law enforcement pretended he didn't exist as long as his operations stayed clean and his violence stayed contained. He'd earned that power by being exactly what his world demanded: cold, calculating, and completely untouchable, which made his current situation particularly problematic. The Nakamura family sent another proposal. Heyman Park, his lieutenant, reported from across the steel desk. Their daughter just graduated from Harvard Business, speaks 4 languages, impeccable bloodline. Ji-sung didn't look up from the financial reports spread before him. No. The Volkov organization is offering a partnership through marriage. The woman's beautiful, connected, comes with shipping contracts worth... No. Heyman sighed. Boss, you've rejected every alliance marriage proposal for 3 years. The other families are starting to think you're either gay or planning to eliminate them all. Let them think whatever keeps them nervous, Ji-sung replied, finally raising his eyes. I don't need a wife to run my business. You need allies, Hammond pressed, and in our world marriage is how alliances get sealed. It's how trust gets built. It's how men trade women like livestock. Ji-sung cut him off. I've seen enough of those marriages to know exactly what they're worth. His parents' marriage had been one of those strategic unions, 2 powerful families joining forces through the sacrifice of 2 people who'd never chosen each other. He'd watched his mother fade into elegant misery, while his father conducted business through mistresses, and his wife conducted life through prescription pills. When they'd both died in a car accident that may or may not have been orchestrated by rivals, Ji-sung had inherited an empire and a deep suspicion of anything that resembled love. The families won't wait forever, Heyman warned. Eventually they'll stop offering partnerships and start offering ultimatums. Then we'll handle ultimatums when they come, Ji-sung said. Right now, I have a shipment arriving at the docks that needs my attention more than some stranger's daughter. But 3 hours later, walking back from a meeting with dock supervisors who'd needed gentle persuasion to overlook certain cargo manifests, Ji-sung found his mind wandering to places it had no business going. The December air cut through his wool coat like ice through silk. Baltimore's downtown emptied after business hours, leaving only the hardcore commuters, the night shift workers, and the people who had nowhere else to go. It was nearly midnight when he saw her. The bus stop sat under a flickering streetlight that cast everything in intermittent gold and shadow. Most people would have walked past without noticing. Just another piece of urban furniture in a city full of invisible struggles. But Ji-sung noticed everything. It was how he'd stayed alive this long. The girl on the bench was black, probably mid-20s, with natural hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and clothes that had seen better months. She'd arranged herself carefully, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around her shins, head tucked down to conserve body heat. She wasn't passed out drunk or high. She wasn't mentally ill or dangerous, she was just tired. Bone deep, soul-crushing tired in the way that came from working multiple jobs that still didn't pay enough for basic dignity. Ji-sung had seen that exhaustion before, in his mother's face during the rare moments when she'd thought no one was watching. The weight of surviving in a world that demanded more than you had to give. He should have kept walking. Instead, he found himself studying the way she breathed, slow, controlled, like even in sleep she was being careful not to take up too much space or make too much noise. The wind picked up, and she shivered without waking. Ji-sung looked around the empty street, then back at the girl who was trying to sleep on a bench that had been designed to prevent exactly that. He made a decision that would have horrified his lieutenant. 20 minutes later, he returned with a thick wool blanket from the emergency kit in his car and a sealed envelope containing $500 in cash. He moved quietly, placing the blanket gently over her shoulders and tucking the envelope underneath where she'd find it when she woke. She stirred as he stepped back, her eyes fluttering open in that confused way of someone pulled from deep sleep. "Hey," she called softly, her voice hoarse but not afraid. "Wait." Ji-sung froze. She sat up slowly, the blanket pooling around her waist, and looked at him with eyes that held gratitude instead of suspicion. "Thank you," she whispered, 2 words that hit him harder than any rival's threat. In his world, gratitude was always calculated. People thanked him because they feared what would happen if they didn't, or because they wanted something more. But this girl, whose name he didn't know, whose story he couldn't guess, had thanked him simply because he'd shown her kindness. When was the last time anyone had done that? "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, the words coming out rougher than he'd intended. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "And what about you? Should you be alone out here?" The question caught him off guard, not because it was intrusive, but because it was gentle, like she was genuinely concerned about a stranger's well-being. "My world is different," he replied carefully. "Everyone's world is hard," she said simply. Ji-sung almost laughed. Almost. No one in his world would dare contradict him so casually, so matter-of-factly. But this girl wasn't part of his world, and that was exactly why he found himself memorizing the sound of her voice. "Get somewhere safe," he said, stepping back into the shadows. "You too," she called after him. He didn't turn around. If he did, he wasn't sure he'd be able to leave. But as he walked away, Ji-sung realized something that should have terrified him. For the first time in years, he was already planning to come back. The girl sleeping at the bus stop had cracked something open in his chest that he'd thought was permanently sealed. And despite every instinct screaming that attachment was weakness, that caring was dangerous, that letting anyone matter was the first step toward losing everything. He wanted to know her name. Ji-sung told himself he was conducting surveillance. The bus stop sat at the intersection of 2 major routes, making it an ideal observation point for monitoring traffic patterns, identifying potential threats and maintaining awareness of his territory's boundaries. It had nothing to do with the girl, except he'd been conducting this particular surveillance for 6 consecutive nights, and the only thing he'd learned was that her name was Amira. She worked at Goldberg's Bakery on Lexington Street, and she had a habit of whispering thank you to empty air whenever she found the small gifts he left for her. Tonight, she was awake when he arrived. She sat on the bench with her legs crossed, the wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders like a cape, eating what looked like day-old bread from a paper bag. When she saw him approaching from across the street, she smiled. Actually smiled. "You came back," she said, and there was surprise in her voice. Pleasant surprise. Ji-sung had been prepared for fear, suspicion, maybe demands for more money. He hadn't been prepared for the way her face lit up, like he was someone she'd been hoping to see. "You're still here," he replied, settling onto the far end of the bench. Close enough to talk, far enough to avoid crowding her. "Where else would I go?" she asked, but there was no bitterness in it, just practical acceptance. "The shelter on closes at 10, opens at 6, she interrupted gently. "And there's a waiting list, and you have to be there by 7 to get a spot for the next night. And if you work late, which I do, you miss the cutoff." Ji-sung absorbed this information with the same focus he applied to business intelligence. "How long have you been out here?" "2 weeks," Amira said, offering him a piece of bread from her bag. "You hungry?" The gesture was so casual, so generous, that it took him a moment to respond. When was the last time someone had offered to share food with him? When was the last time someone had offered him anything without expecting something bigger in return? "I'm fine," he said. "That's not what I asked." She held out the bread again. "It's good. Goldberg makes the best sourdough in the city." Against every instinct that told him not to accept anything from anyone, Ji-sung took the bread. It was good. Better than the artisanal loaves served at the restaurants he frequented, where a single dinner cost more than most people made in a week. "You work there?" he asked. "Prep cook, dishwasher, whatever they need him," Amira said. "It's honest work, pays enough to eat. Just not enough for first month last month, and security deposit all at once." She said it without self-pity, just stating facts. "What happened to your last place?" "Landlords sold the building. New owners wanted to renovate, so they evicted everyone with month-to-month leases." She shrugged. "Happens all the time in this city. You adapt or you go under." Ji-sung studied her profile in the flickering streetlight. She was beautiful, not in the polished, artificial way of the women his associates tried to set him up with, but in the way of someone who'd learned to find grace in difficult circumstances. "You have family here?" he asked. "Had a grandmother in West Baltimore. She passed last year." Amira pulled the blanket tighter. "What about you? You from here?" The question was so normal, so conversational, that Ji-sung almost answered honestly. Almost told her about growing up in the mansion in Guilford, about private schools and family expectations, and the weight of inheriting an empire built on violence and fear. Instead he said, "I've been here a while." "You talk like someone with money," she observed. "But you're out here at midnight talking to homeless girls, so either you're really generous, really lonely, or really dangerous." The accuracy of her assessment should have alarmed him. Instead, it made him want to smile. "What if it's all three?" he asked. "Then I guess we're both taking risks," Amira replied. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sharing the bread and the blanket's warmth. Their shoulders brushed once when she reached for her water bottle, and Ji-sung felt something electric run through him. Not desire, exactly. Something deeper, something that felt like recognition. "Can I ask you something?" Amira said eventually. "Sure. Why do you keep coming back?" It was the question he'd been asking himself for a week. The question that had no good answer, no logical explanation. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said finally. "Neither should you." She turned to face him fully, and in the broken light her eyes were serious. "I don't know who you are," she said quietly. "But I know you're not just some guy who works late and walks home past bus stops. You move like someone who's used to people getting out of your way. You dress like money even when you're trying not to. And you watch everything, like you're expecting trouble." Ji-sung's hand moved instinctively toward the gun concealed under his jacket, then stopped. "Does that scare you?" he asked. "Should it?" "Probably." Amira considered this for a moment. "Are you going to hurt me?" "No." "Then I'm not scared." The simplicity of her logic was staggering. In his world, people feared him because of what he might do, what he represented, what his presence meant for their safety and survival. But Amira had reduced it to the only question that actually mattered. Would he hurt her? And when he'd said no, she'd believed him. "You're either very trusting or very naive," Ji-sung said. "I'm very tired," she corrected. "And you're the first person in 2 weeks who's treated me like I'm human, instead of a problem to be solved or ignored. So maybe I'm choosing to trust you, because the alternative is believing that kindness doesn't exist anymore." Her words hit him like a physical blow. Kindness. When was the last time anyone had accused him of kindness? "Amira," he said, testing her name. "How did you—" She stopped. "I never told you my name." "You talk to yourself sometimes," he said, "when you think no one's listening." Instead of being alarmed, she laughed, a soft, genuine sound that did something dangerous to his chest. "What's your name?" she asked. Ji-sung hesitated. His real name was known to law enforcement, rival families, anyone who paid attention to the city's power structures. But looking at Amira's open, expectant face, he found himself wanting to give her something true. "Ji-sung," he said. Ji-sung, she repeated, and somehow his name sounded different in her voice, softer, like it belonged to someone better than the man who'd earned it. "Thank you," she said, "for the blanket, for the money, for sitting here with me, for treating me like I matter." "You do matter," he said, and the words came out with more intensity than he'd intended. Amira's eyes widened slightly. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." "What do you know?" Ji-sung looked at this woman who'd been sleeping on a bench for 2 weeks, but still offered to share her bread with strangers. Who'd lost her home and her family but refused to lose her humanity. Who'd been invisible to everyone else in the city, but somehow managed to see him more clearly than people who'd known him for years. "I know you're stronger than anyone who's ever tried to break you," he said quietly. "I know you're kinder than you have any reason to be. And I know that meeting you has changed something in me that I didn't think could be changed." The confession hung between them like a bridge neither of them had expected to build. "Ji-sung," Amira whispered, and there was something in her voice that made his name sound like a prayer. That's when he saw the black SUV circling the block for the second time, and realized that his carefully compartmentalized worlds were about to collide in the most dangerous way possible. Amira had learned to notice things that other people missed. When you lived on the margins, survival depended on reading the subtle signs that preceded danger, the way conversations stopped when you approached, the difference between someone looking at you and someone looking through you, the particular tension that meant a situation was about to turn bad. So when the black SUV completed its third slow circle around the block, she paid attention. When 2 men in expensive coats positioned themselves at opposite corners of the intersection, pretending to check their phones while keeping the bus stop in their peripheral vision, she paid attention. And when Ji-sung's entire body went rigid beside her, his hand moving towards something concealed under his jacket, she knew her instincts were right. "Friends of yours?" she asked quietly. Ji-sung's jaw tightened. "No." "Enemies?" "Probably." Amira pulled out her cracked phone and pretended to scroll through messages while actually activating the camera. She'd learned this trick from other homeless women: document everything, because no one believes you when you have nothing. The 2 men were talking now, their voices carrying across the empty street. "Should be here soon," the taller one was saying. His accent was slight but noticeable. Japanese, maybe. "Boss wants him alive," the shorter man replied. "But the girl's a loose end." Amira's blood turned to ice. They weren't just hunting Ji-sung. They knew about her. She kept recording, her hands steady despite the fear crawling up her throat. In her peripheral vision, she could see Ji-sung calculating distances, exits, angles of attack. "How many?" she whispered. "2 visible," he replied. "Probably more in the vehicle." "What do they want?" Ji-sung looked at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw something that might have been fear, not for himself, for her. "They want to send a message," he said, "and you're in the way." The SUV pulled to the curb. "Amira," Ji-sung said urgently, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. In about 30 seconds, I'm going to create a distraction. When I do, you run. Don't look back. Don't try to help. Just run." "What about you?" "I'll be fine." "That's not what I asked." He turned to face her fully, and in the broken streetlight his expression was fierce and tender and absolutely final. "I will not let them hurt you," he said. "Do you understand me? Whatever happens, I will not let them hurt you." Before she could respond, the SUV's doors opened. 4 men emerged, the 2 she'd already seen, plus 2 others who moved with the fluid precision of people trained for violence. They spread out in a formation designed to cut off all escape routes. Ji-sung stood slowly, his movements controlled and deliberate. "Ji-sung Kim," the tall man called out. "You've been avoiding our calls." "I've been busy," Ji-sung replied, and his voice had changed completely. Gone was the gentle tone he'd used with her. This was the voice of someone accustomed to command, to respect, to fear. "Mr. Nakamura is disappointed," the man continued. "He offered you a generous partnership, marriage to his daughter, access to his shipping networks, protection for your operations. I declined politely. Declining Mr. Nakamura is not an option." Amira watched this exchange with growing understanding. The expensive clothes, the careful way he moved, the deference in his enemies' voices even as they threatened him. Ji-sung wasn't just connected to dangerous people, He was dangerous, people. And if I continue to decline? Ji-sung asked. The shorter man smiled. Then we make sure you understand the consequences of disrespecting our family. His gaze shifted to Amira, and the threat was unmistakable. That's when she made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of running, she stood up. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying the same polite firmness she used with difficult customers at the bakery. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." The four men turned to stare at her like she'd materialized from thin air. "Amira," Ji-sung said urgently. "Don't." "I'm not his girlfriend," she continued, ignoring him. "I'm just someone who sleeps here sometimes. We barely know each other." The tall man's eyes narrowed. "You expect us to believe that?" "I expect you to believe evidence," she said, pulling out her phone. "I recorded your conversation. The part where you talked about eliminating loose ends. The part where you admitted to planning violence against someone who hasn't committed any crime except declining a business proposal." She held up the device, and the screen clearly showed the timestamp and location. "I also sent a copy to a friend," she lied smoothly, "with instructions to forward it to the police if I don't check in within the hour." It was a bluff. She had no friends, no backup plan, no safety net except her own quick thinking. But the men didn't know that. "You're making a mistake," the shorter man said. "No," Amira replied. "You're making a mistake. You're assuming I'm helpless because I'm homeless. You're assuming I'm stupid because I'm poor. And you're assuming I don't matter because I'm invisible." She took a step forward, and something in her posture, the straightness of her spine, the steadiness of her gaze, made the armed men actually step back. "But invisible people see everything," she continued. "And poor people have nothing left to lose. And helpless people sometimes turn out to be the most dangerous ones of all." The silence that followed was electric. Ji-sung stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. The four men looked between each other, clearly recalculating their approach. Finally, the tall man spoke. "This isn't over," he said to Ji-sung. "No," Ji-sung agreed. "It's not." But his voice held a promise that made the men exchange nervous glances. They retreated to their SUV, but slowly, maintaining the illusion of control even as they abandoned their mission. As the vehicle disappeared around the corner, Amira's knees nearly buckled. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was fading, leaving behind the reality of what had just happened. She'd just threatened members of an organized crime family. She'd just saved the life of a man she was beginning to suspect was far more dangerous than she'd imagined. And she just painted a target on her own back that would never completely disappear. "Amira," Ji-sung said softly. She turned to look at him and saw something in his expression that made her chest tight. "You saved my life," he said. "You would have done the same for me." "Yes," he agreed. "But I'm trained for this." "You're not. You shouldn't have." "I shouldn't have what?" she interrupted. "Stood up for someone who's been kind to me. Refused to let bullies win. Used the only weapons I had." Ji-sung stepped closer, and for the first time she could see the full weight of whatever world he carried on his shoulders. "You don't understand what you've done," he said. "What this means. What they'll do now. Then explain it to me." "Amira, explain it to me," she repeated firmly. "Because I'm already involved. I was involved the moment I decided to trust you. So stop trying to protect me from the truth and start trusting me with it." Ji-sung looked at her for a long moment, this woman who'd been sleeping on a bench 2 hours ago and was now demanding transparency from one of the most secretive men on the East Coast. "My name is Ji-sung Kim," he said finally. "I run the largest Korean syndicate in Baltimore. I control shipping, construction, and information networks worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I have enemies who would kill me for my territory, and allies who would kill me for my secrets." He paused, watching her face for signs of fear or disgust. Instead, she nodded like he'd just told her he worked in accounting. "Okay," she said. "What else?" "What else?" he repeated, incredulous. "You're obviously not telling me this to scare me away," she said. "So what else do I need to know?" Ji-sung stared at her, and something shifted in his chest. Something that felt like the last wall he'd built around his heart, finally crumbling. "I've rejected every marriage proposal, every alliance, every woman who's been offered to me for 3 years, he said. "Because I thought love was weakness. I thought caring about someone would make me vulnerable. And now? Now I think I was wrong," he said quietly. "Because caring about you doesn't make me feel weak." It makes me feel like I could tear down the entire world to keep you safe. Amira's breath caught. Jisung, I'm falling in love with you, he said. And that terrifies me more than any enemy ever could. The words hung between them like a confession and a warning and a promise all at once. I don't want your world, she whispered. I know. I don't want your money or your power or your protection. I know. I want you, she said. Just you. The man who sits on frozen benches and shares bread with strangers. The man who sees me when everyone else looks through me. Jisung stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. That man is still me, he said, but he comes with everything else. The violence, the danger, the enemies who will use you to hurt me. Then we'll face it together, Amira said simply. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the sharp line of his jaw. I'm saying that I'd rather be in danger with you than safe without you. Jisung closed his eyes and leaned into her touch. This is insane, he murmured. Probably. You could get killed. I could get killed crossing the street. I could get killed sleeping on this bench. At least with you I'd be living first. When he opened his eyes, they were blazing with something that made her knees weak. If we do this, he said, if we really do this, there's no going back. Once you're mine forever, and I protect what's mine with everything I have. Is that a threat or a promise? Both. Amira smiled, and it was the first time in weeks that the expression felt completely genuine. Then we do this, she said, slowly, carefully, but we do this. Jisung lowered his forehead to hers, and in that moment, the most feared man in Baltimore looked like a boy who'd just been offered something he'd never dared to want. As long as it takes, he whispered. As long as it takes, she agreed. And standing under the flickering streetlight where they'd first found each other, they began building something that neither of them had believed was possible. A love strong enough to survive his world. The safe house was nothing like Amira had expected. Instead of the sterile, fortress-like compound she'd imagined, Jisung brought her to a converted brownstone in Federal Hill that looked like any other gentrified row house from the outside. Inside, it was warm, comfortable, and surprisingly normal. Hardwood floors, exposed brick walls, a kitchen that actually looked like someone cooked in it. This is where you live, she asked, setting down the single bag that contained everything she owned. One of the places, Jisung replied, watching her take in the space. It's clean, no surveillance, no business connections, just a place to exist. Amira ran her fingers along the back of a leather couch that probably cost more than she'd made in the last 6 months. How many places do you have? Enough. She turned to face him, and he could see the questions building behind her eyes. Not fear. She'd moved past that the night she'd stood up to armed men with nothing but a phone camera and sheer audacity. But curiosity about the life she was choosing to enter. The men from last night, she said. Will they come back? Not directly. Jisung moved to the window, checking the street out of habit. But they'll report to Nakamura, and he'll escalate. Meaning he'll stop asking politely for what he wants. Amira absorbed this information the same way she'd absorbed everything else, with practical acceptance rather than panic. So what do we do? The casual use of we did something to Jisung's chest that he wasn't prepared for. In his world, loyalty was bought, fear was cultivated, and trust was a luxury that got people killed. But Amira spoke like they were partners, like his problems had automatically become her problems, simply because she'd chosen to care about him. We disappear for a while, he said. Let me handle the situation without worrying about your safety. No. The word was quiet, but absolute. Amira. No, she repeated, moving to stand in front of him. I'm not going into hiding while you fight a war by yourself. That's not how partnerships work. This isn't a partnership, Jisung said, though the words felt wrong even as he spoke them. This is me protecting someone I care about. And what am I doing? What do you mean? What am I doing in this relationship? She asked. If you're the protector, and I'm the protected, if you're the one who makes decisions and I'm the one who follows them, then what exactly am I bringing to the table? Jisung stared at her, caught off guard by the question. You're bringing yourself, he said finally. That's not enough. It's everything. Amira shook her head. Not if myself means being a helpless princess locked in a tower while you slay dragons. I didn't survive 2 weeks on the street by being helpless, and I'm not going to start now. She was right, and they both knew it. The woman who'd confronted armed criminals with nothing but quick thinking and moral courage wasn't someone who could be tucked away for safekeeping. Then what do you suggest? He asked. I suggest you tell me everything, she said. About Nakamura, about the threat, about your business, all of it, and then we figure out how to handle it together. Jisung felt something shift inside him, a wall he hadn't even realized he'd built, crumbling under the weight of her determination. You want to know about my business? He asked. I want to know about your life. So he told her everything. He told her about growing up as the heir to an empire built on violence and fear, about watching his parents' strategic marriage destroy them both, about the weight of controlling territory and managing alliances and making decisions that determined who lived and who disappeared. He told her about the legitimate businesses that laundered money and provided cover, about the shipping networks that moved everything from luxury cars to human trafficking victims, about the politicians and police officers and judges who took his money and looked the other way. He told her about the enemies who wanted his territory, the allies who wanted his power, and the constant calculation required to stay alive in a world where trust was weakness and mercy was suicide. And through it all, Amira listened without judgment, without horror, without the revulsion he'd expected. The human trafficking, she said when he finished. You stop that. It wasn't a question. When I can, he replied. It's complicated. If I move too aggressively against the networks, I lose the intelligence that lets me intercept shipments. But you do intercept them. Yes. And the people you save. Safe houses, new identities, transportation to wherever they want to go. Amira nodded like this confirmed something she'd already suspected. What about drugs? I don't deal in anything that targets kids, Jisung said, and I don't allow operations in residential neighborhoods. Prostitution? Only consenting adults. Anyone who wants out gets help leaving. She was quiet for a moment, processing. You're not what I expected, she said finally. What did you expect? A monster. She looked at him with something that might have been admiration. But you're not, are you? You're just a man trying to do the least amount of harm in a world that rewards the most amount of violence. I've killed people, Amira. I know. I've ordered deaths. I've destroyed lives. You've also saved lives, she interrupted. You've protected people who couldn't protect themselves. You've built something that could be purely evil and chosen to make it something else. Jisung stared at her, stunned by her ability to see complexity where others saw only black and white. You're not afraid of me, he said. Should I be? Most people would be. I'm not most people. She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of vanilla from her hair. And you're not most people either. You're the man who gave a homeless woman a blanket without expecting anything in return. You're the man who shared bread on a frozen bench because someone offered it to you with genuine kindness. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the scar that ran along his left temple, a souvenir from a rival's attempt to eliminate him 3 years ago. You're the man who's falling in love with me, she whispered, and I'm the woman who's falling in love with you. The confession hit him like a physical blow. Amira. I love you, she said simply. Not your power, not your money, not your protection. You. The man who sees me when everyone else looks through me. The man who treats me like I matter. Jisung cupped her face in his hands, and for the first time in his adult life, he felt something that might have been peace. I love you too, he said, more than I thought I was capable of loving anyone. Then we face this together, she said. Whatever Nakamura wants, whatever he's planning, we handle it as partners. It's dangerous. Everything worthwhile is dangerous. You could get hurt. I could get hurt anyway. At least this way I'm choosing my risks. Jisung looked at this woman who'd been sleeping on a bench a week ago and was now demanding equal partnership in a war against one of the most ruthless crime families on the East Coast. You're insane, he said. Probably. You're going to get us both killed. Maybe. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. Amira smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise after the longest night of his life. Now you're getting it, she said. That's when his phone rang. The caller ID showed Heyman's number, but when Jisung answered, a different voice came through the speaker. Mr. Kim, the man said, and Jisung recognized the accent immediately. This is Kenji Nakamura. Amira's eyes widened, but she stayed silent. Mr. Nakamura, Jisung replied, his voice carefully neutral. To what do I owe the pleasure? I think we both know why I'm calling. Your people were quite rude to my representatives last night. Your representatives threatened an innocent woman. Ah, yes, the homeless girl. Nakamura's tone was dismissive. I'm told she's quite spirited. It would be a shame if something happened to her. Jisung's grip on the phone tightened, and Amira could see the violence building behind his eyes. Is that a threat? He asked. It's a clarification, Nakamura replied. You seem to be under the impression that you have a choice in this matter. Let me correct that misunderstanding. I'm listening. You will marry my daughter within the month. You will merge your shipping operations with mine, and you will provide me with detailed intelligence on your competitors' activities. And if I refuse, then the woman dies, slowly, and you watch. The line went dead. Jisung stared at the phone, his mind already calculating responses. Strategies, ways to eliminate the threat without triggering a war that would consume half the East Coast. So, Amira said calmly. When do we kill him? Jisung's head snapped up. What? You heard me. Her voice was steady, matter of fact. He just threatened to torture and murder me to force you into slavery. When do we kill him? Amira, you can't just... Can't what? Defend myself. Defend us? She moved to the window, looking out at the street with the same careful attention he'd shown earlier. You told me this was a partnership. Partners don't let each other get threatened without consequences. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. She turned back to face him, and her eyes were blazing with something that made his chest tight. He thinks I'm a weakness he can exploit. He thinks I'm helpless prey he can use to control you. Aren't you? The question slipped out before he could stop it, and Amira's expression shifted to something that was almost pitying. Oh, Jisung, she said softly, you still don't understand, do you? Understand what? I'm not your weakness, she said. I'm your secret weapon. And looking at her, this woman who'd faced down armed criminals with nothing but courage, who'd demanded truth instead of protection, who'd just casually suggested assassination like she was planning dinner, Jisung realized she was absolutely right. Nakamura had made a critical error. He'd threatened the wrong woman, and now he was going to learn exactly what happened to people who underestimated Amira Hart. The plan was elegant in its simplicity, which made it absolutely terrifying. You want to use yourself as bait, Jisung said for the third time, pacing the length of his living room like a caged predator. I want to use their assumptions against them, Amira corrected, spreading the building blueprints across his coffee table. There's a difference. The difference is semantic. The result is you walking into a room full of people who want to kill you. The result is us ending this before it escalates into a war that destroys everything you've built. Jisung stopped pacing and looked at her, really looked at her. 2 weeks ago, she'd been sleeping on a bench, invisible to everyone who mattered. Now she was studying architectural plans with the focused intensity of a general preparing for battle. How are you so calm about this? He asked. Because I've been powerless my entire life, she replied, without looking up. And now for the first time I have the chance to choose my own fate instead of having it chosen for me. The Nakamura family's weekly business dinner was held every Friday at Kiku, an exclusive Japanese restaurant in Harbor East that catered to the kind of clientele who paid for privacy as much as they paid for food. Security was tight but predictable. 2 guards at the front, 1 at the back exit, and a sweep of the dining room every 30 minutes. What they wouldn't expect was a homeless black woman walking through the front door like she belonged there. The moment you're inside, you have maybe 10 minutes before they realize something's wrong, Jisung said, checking his watch for the 5th time in as many minutes. 10 minutes is plenty, Amira replied, adjusting the small recording device hidden in the collar of the dress he'd bought her, simple, elegant, expensive enough to pass casual inspection, but not so flashy as to draw attention. And if something goes wrong? Then you come get me. Amira! Jisung! She turned to face him fully, and her expression was steady, determined, absolutely fearless. I know what I'm doing. You've never done anything like this before. Neither had I when I stood up to those men at the bus stop, she pointed out. But I figured it out. She was right, and they both knew it. but that didn't make watching her walk into danger any easier. "I should be the one going in there," he said. "You should be the one they never see coming," she corrected. "That's how this works. I get them focused on the wrong threat while you eliminate the real one." The real threat was Kenji Nakamura himself, not his soldiers, not his lieutenants, but the man who'd built his empire on the principle that fear was more valuable than respect. Take him out, and the rest of the organization would fracture into competing factions, too busy fighting each other to threaten anyone else. But getting close enough to Nakamura required a distraction, and Amira was going to be that distraction. "Promise me something," Jisung said. "What?" "Promise me you'll run if things go bad. Don't try to be a hero. Don't try to save anyone else. Just run." Amira stepped closer, close enough that she could see the fear he was trying to hide behind tactical planning and professional concern. "I promise," she said, "that I'll do whatever it takes to come home to you." It wasn't the promise he'd asked for, but it was the one she could give. Jisung cupped her face in his hands, memorizing every detail, the way her eyes reflected light, the small scar on her chin from a childhood accident, the stubborn set of her jaw that had first told him she was stronger than her circumstances. "I love you, he said. "I love you too." When this is over, she interrupted, "we'll have the rest of our lives to figure out what comes next." He kissed her then, soft and desperate, and full of everything he couldn't say. When they broke apart, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Go," she whispered, "before I lose my nerve." Jisung left through the back exit, melting into the shadows like he'd been born to them. Amira waited exactly 3 minutes, then walked out the front door and into the most dangerous night of her life. Kiku was everything she'd expected: understated elegance, hushed conversations, the kind of atmosphere that suggested discretion was more valuable than ostentation. The hostess looked at her with polite confusion, clearly trying to place her in the hierarchy of people who belonged in a place like this. "I'm here to see Mr. Nakamura," Amira said, her voice carrying just enough authority to forestall immediate questions. "Do you have a reservation?" "He's expecting me." It was a lie, but delivered with enough confidence that the hostess hesitated instead of immediately calling security. "Your name?" "Amira Hart." The hostess consulted her tablet, frowned, then looked up with the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sorry, but I don't see your name on tonight's list. Perhaps there's been a mistake." "Perhaps you should ask Mr. Nakamura directly," Amira suggested. "I'm sure he'll want to know I'm here." The implied threat was subtle but unmistakable. The hostess's smile became even more strained. "Of course, if you'll just wait here for a moment." Amira watched her disappear toward the back of the restaurant, then used the time to study the layout. 2 exits, as expected. Security cameras in the corners, but positioned to monitor the dining room rather than the service areas. A clear line of sight to the private dining room, where Nakamura held court every Friday night. The hostess returned with a man Amira recognized from Jisung's intelligence files, Hiroshi Tanaka, Nakamura's head of security. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of stillness that suggested violence was always an option. "Ms. Hart," he said, his English accented but precise. "Mr. Nakamura is curious about your unexpected visit. I'm sure he is. Perhaps you could explain your business." "My business is with Mr. Nakamura," she replied, "not his employees." Tanaka's eyes narrowed slightly, but he gestured toward the back of the restaurant. "This way." The private dining room was larger than she'd expected, with a single long table surrounded by men in expensive suits. At the head of the table sat Kenji Nakamura, 60s, silver-haired, with the kind of presence that suggested he was accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room. Until tonight. "Ms. Hart," he said, not bothering to stand. "How unexpected." "Mr. Nakamura." Amira moved to the center of the room, positioning herself where everyone could see her clearly. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. I don't recall agreeing to anything, but I must admit, I'm curious about what brings Jisung Kim's pet to my dinner table." The insult was calculated, designed to provoke a reaction that would justify whatever came next. Amira smiled instead. "I'm here to make you an offer," she said. "Oh, I want to propose a trade." Nakamura leaned back in his chair, genuinely amused. "What could you possibly have that I want?" "Information," Amira said. about Jisung's operations, his suppliers, his routes, his security protocols, everything you'd need to take over his territory without a war. The room went completely silent. "And what would you want in return?" Nakamura asked. "Safe passage out of the city, new identity, enough money to start over somewhere he'll never find me." "Ah," Nakamura's smile was predatory. "Trouble in paradise. Turns out dating a crime boss isn't as romantic as it sounds," Amira said. "Who knew?" Several of the men chuckled, and Amira could feel the tension in the room shifting. They were buying it, the idea that she was just another woman who'd gotten in over her head and wanted out. "You realize," Nakamura said, "that betraying Jisung Kim is not something one does lightly. He has a reputation for dealing harshly with disloyalty." "He has a reputation for a lot of things," Amira replied, "but he also has a weakness for strays. He thinks I'm helpless, thinks I need his protection. He has no idea I've been documenting everything since the day we met." She pulled out her phone, showing them a screen full of photos, voice recordings, and text files. "Insurance," she explained, "in case things went bad." Nakamura studied her for a long moment, and Amira could practically see him weighing the possibilities. A woman scorned, offering intelligence that could end his biggest rival, without the cost and uncertainty of open war. "Assuming your information is genuine," he said finally, "what guarantee do I have that this isn't some elaborate trap?" "What guarantee do I have that you won't kill me the moment you get what you want?" she countered. "We're both taking risks here." "True." Nakamura gestured to one of his men. "Show me something. Prove the intelligence is real." Amira scrolled through her phone, then turned the screen toward him. "Shipping manifest from last Tuesday's delivery. Warehouse location, security codes, inventory list. You can verify it independently." Nakamura's eyes widened slightly as he read the information. It was real. Jisung had shared it with her as part of his promise to hide nothing about his business. "Impressive," he admitted. "But this is just one shipment. I need broader intelligence. And I need guarantees about my safety," Amira replied. "So here's what I propose. I give you everything I have, you give me what I want, and we both get what we need." "And Jisung?" "Jisung gets what he deserves." The words tasted like ash in her mouth, but she delivered them with perfect conviction. Nakamura smiled, a cold, satisfied expression that made her skin crawl. "Very well," he said. "I accept your proposal." That's when the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing the room in red shadows. In the confusion, Amira heard the distinctive sound of silenced gunshots from the main dining room. "What the hell?" one of Nakamura's men started to say. He never finished the sentence. Jisung appeared in the doorway like death incarnate, moving with fluid precision that turned violence into art. The first man went down with a knife to the throat. The second managed to draw his gun before Jisung broke his wrist and used the weapon against his partner. In less than 30 seconds, every man in the room except Nakamura was dead or dying. "Hello, Kenji," Jisung said conversationally, stepping over bodies like they were furniture. Nakamura's face had gone pale, but his voice remained steady. "Jisung, I should have known." "You should have known a lot of things," Jisung agreed, "like the fact that threatening the woman I love was the last mistake you'd ever make." "The woman you love?" Nakamura's gaze shifted to Amira, and understanding dawned in his eyes. "She was never betraying you." "No," Jisung said. "She was getting you to confess to conspiracy, extortion, and attempted murder. All of which is now recorded and will be delivered to my contacts in federal law enforcement within the hour." Nakamura's laugh was bitter. "You think the FBI will protect you?" "I think the FBI will be very interested in your human trafficking operations," Amira said, speaking for the first time since the shooting started, "especially the ones involving minors." She held up her phone, showing the recording that had been running since she'd entered the restaurant. "Turns out you talk a lot when you think you're winning," she continued, including some very specific details about shipments that the authorities have been trying to trace for months. Nakamura's composure finally cracked. "You have no idea what you've done. My family, my allies, will be too busy fighting over your territory to worry about revenge," Jisung interrupted. "Amazing how quickly loyalty evaporates when the money stops flowing." He moved closer to Nakamura, his gun trained on the older man's chest. "You made this personal when you threatened her," he said quietly. "That was your mistake. Wait, Nakamura said, desperation creeping into his voice. We can make a deal. I have resources, connections. You have nothing I want, Jisung replied. The single gunshot echoed through the restaurant. Kenji Nakamura slumped forward, his eyes already vacant. Jisung turned to Amira, his expression shifting from cold efficiency to tender concern in an instant. Are you hurt? He asked, holstering his weapon. No, she said, though her hands were shaking slightly. I'm okay. You were perfect, he said, pulling her into his arms. Absolutely perfect. I was terrified, she admitted against his chest. Good. Terror keeps you alive in situations like this. Sirens wailed in the distance, not police, but the private security team that would clean up the scene and ensure that tonight's events never officially happened. What now? Amira asked. Now we go home, Jisung said, and we start building the life we want instead of the one we inherited. Together? Together. As they walked out of the restaurant, stepping over bodies and broken glass, Amira realized that she'd never felt safer in her life. The woman who'd been sleeping on a bench 2 weeks ago was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who'd chosen her own fate and fought for her own future, someone who'd found love in the most unlikely place and refused to let anyone take it away. I love you, she said as they reached the street. I love you too, Jisung replied, more than I ever thought possible. Even after tonight? Especially after tonight. Because tonight had proven something that neither of them had dared to hope. They were stronger together than either of them had ever been alone. And in a world built on fear and violence, that kind of strength was the most dangerous weapon of all. Years later, Amira would wake up in their bedroom overlooking the inner harbor and marvel at the journey that had brought her here. The penthouse was a far cry from the bus stop where they'd first met, but Jisung had insisted on keeping the original bench in their living room, a reminder of where their story had begun. The restaurant empire they'd built together was completely legitimate now, employing hundreds of people and serving as a front for the charitable foundation that helped homeless women find housing and job training. The Korean syndicate still existed, but under Jisung's reformed leadership, it had evolved into something closer to a protective organization than a criminal enterprise. They still dealt with threats, still navigated the complex politics of their world, but they did it with honor instead of fear. Good morning, Jisung murmured against her neck, his arms tightening around her waist. Good morning, she replied, settling back against his chest. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Baltimore was waking up, traffic building on the streets below, the harbor reflecting the early morning light, the city that had witnessed their beginning continuing its eternal rhythm. Any regrets? He asked, a question that had become their morning ritual. None, she answered, which was always her response. Because despite the danger, despite the violence, despite the nights when she'd lain awake wondering if they'd both survived the choices they'd made, she'd never regretted choosing him, choosing them, choosing love over safety, partnership over protection, truth over comfortable lies. What are you thinking about? Jisung asked. That night at the restaurant, she said. When you asked me what I wanted. You said you wanted me. Just me. I was wrong, she said, turning in his arms to face him. His eyebrows rose. Oh? I didn't just want you, she said, tracing the scar on his temple that she'd learned to love. I wanted us. I wanted the life we could build together, the people we could become together, the good we could do together. And now I have it all. Jisung smiled, the soft, genuine expression that was reserved only for her, only for moments like this when the rest of the world fell away, and it was just them. So do I, he said, even though I made you give up your bachelor lifestyle. Especially because you made me give up my bachelor lifestyle. She laughed, the sound filling their bedroom with warmth and light. I love you, Jisung Kim. I love you too, Amira Kim. The name still sent a thrill through her, even after all this time, not because of the status it carried or the protection it offered, but because it represented something she'd never thought she'd have. A home, a family, a future built on choice rather than circumstance. Ready to face the day? He asked. With you? Always. And as they rose to meet whatever challenges awaited them, Amira reflected on the strange turns that had brought a homeless woman, and a crime boss together on a frozen bench and transformed them into something neither had expected. Partners in every sense of the word. Equals who'd chosen each other not out of desperation or convenience, but out of recognition. Two souls who'd seen past the surface to the strength beneath. The girl who'd slept at the bus stop was gone. In her place was a woman who'd learned that sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was believe in love. And sometimes that danger was worth everything. Thank you for watching Korean Mafia Lovers until the very end. We have so many more passionate stories waiting for you. Subscribe to our channel and help us continue bringing you these unforgettable tales of love conquering all.